Welcome to the Oracle's Rest, a place where stories unfold slowly, where time softens, and where the mind is free to wander. Tonight, in a quiet wooden hall somewhere in the mountains of Japan, a single monk is sitting perfectly still, facing a plain grey wall, breathing slowly in the dark. He is doing almost nothing at all, and in that nothing lies the whole of what we will speak about tonight. Tonight, we drift into the Japanese art of quieting the mind, the long, patient tradition of Zen, and the simple practices that have helped people lay down their restless thoughts for more than 1,000 years. There is no need to follow closely. There is no need to understand or to remember anything. In a way, that is the very heart of what Zen teaches, the laying down of effort, the letting go of grasping. So as you listen tonight, you may simply let the words pass through you like a slow breath, and let your own busy mind grow quiet, the way a pond grows still once you stop stirring. The water. Zen is a form of Buddhism that took root in Japan many centuries ago. But at its center, it is less a set of beliefs than a way of being still. The word Zen itself comes through Chinese from an old word for meditation, for seated stillness. It does not ask you to think your way to peace. It asks you instead to stop, to sit, to breathe, and to let the noise of the mind settle on its own. That is the whole of it, and also the work of a lifetime. To find the roots of this stillness, we must travel back far beyond Japan, to a half-legendary figure named Bodhidharma, a monk who is said to have carried the teaching from India into China some 1,500 years ago. He is remembered as the first ancestor of Zen, a fierce, bearded figure with wide and burning eyes. And the story told of him captures, better than any explanation, the spirit of the practice he began. It is said that Bodhidharma came at last to a mountain temple in China, and that there he sat down facing a bare stone wall and simply remained there in silent meditation for 9 years. He did not preach. He did not write. He sat and faced the wall, turning his attention inward, still as the stone before him. From this image comes the very heart of Zen, the practice the Japanese would later call zazen, which means, quite simply, seated meditation. The legend grows stranger and more vivid still. It is said that once, after long sitting, Bodhidharma fell asleep and was so angered at his own weakness that he cut away his eyelids so that he might never close his eyes again. This is only a story, of course, a fierce and poetic exaggeration, but it tells us something true about the seriousness with which these early teachers took the simple act of sitting still and staying awake to the present moment. For centuries, this practice of seated meditation grew and deepened in China, where it was called Chan, passed from teacher to student in an unbroken line, and then, in time, it crossed the sea to Japan, carried by Japanese monks who had traveled to China to study and returned home with what they had learned. It was in Japan that Chan became Zen, and that this art of stillness found some of its most beautiful and lasting forms. One of the first to bring it was a monk named Isai, who lived more than 800 years ago. Isai journeyed to China, studied there, and returned to Japan in the year 1191, bringing with him the teachings of the school. That would be called Rinzai, and he carried home something else as well, a small parcel of seeds, the seeds of the tea plant, beginning a story that would bind tea and Zen together in Japan forever after. Eisai founded a temple in the great city of Kyoto called Kenninji, which still stands today as one of the oldest Zen temples in the land. He believed that tea and meditation belonged together, that the quiet, bitter drink could steady the body and clear the mind for long hours of sitting. And so, from the very beginning, in Japan, the practice of stilling the mind was joined to a simple cup of tea, shared in quietness, the steam rising softly in the cold. A generation later came another monk, perhaps the deepest and most beloved of all the Japanese Zen teachers, a man named Dogen. He too traveled to China as a young man, searching, restless, full of doubt, and there, under a strict old master, he came at last to a great and simple realization. The practice and the awakening were not two different things. To sit in meditation was not a means to some far-off enlightenment. The sitting itself, done wholeheartedly, was already the thing itself. Dogen returned to Japan and taught a practice he called shikantaza, a phrase that means, roughly, nothing but precisely sitting, or just sitting. There was no special trick to it, no goal to chase, no riddle to solve. One simply sat, upright and aware, present to whatever arose, neither grasping at thoughts nor pushing them away, to just sit, fully and completely, with nothing added, was for Dogen the purest expression of an awakened life. Dogen eventually withdrew from the busy capital and founded a temple deep in the remote mountains, a place called Aheji, among the cedars and the snow, far from the noise of the world. There the monks rose before dawn to sit, and ordered their whole day around stillness and simple work. Aheji stands to this day, and in its cold halls monks still sit through the long hours of the morning, just as they did nearly 800 years ago, in the same silence, facing the same kind of plain wall. Dogen also left behind a vast and luminous work of writing, gathered under the title Shobogenso, which is often rendered as the treasury of the true Dharma eye. In it, he turned the simplest things over and over. In his careful mind, the act of cooking, the washing of the face, the falling of rain, the nature of time itself, finding in each ordinary moment the whole of the teaching. To read him is to feel a mind that had grown wonderfully quiet and wonderfully awake at once. Among all the things Dogen wrote, a few lines have been treasured above the rest, for in them he gathered the whole of the path into a handful of words. To study the way, he wrote, is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self, and to forget the self is to be awakened by all things. It is a ladder of gentle steps, leading down and inward, from the busy self that worries and grasps, through a quiet forgetting of that self, to a wide and open awareness in which all things shine of their own accord. That forgetting of the self is the soft and secret center of the whole practice. We carry, most of us, a heavy and constant sense of ourselves, a voice forever narrating, comparing, defending, wanting. So much of our weariness is simply the weight of that endless self-concern. To forget the self, even for the space of a few breaths in zazen, is not to be lost or diminished, but to be set free, to let the small anxious self dissolve for a while into the simple, peaceful awareness of things just as they are. Dogen had a beautiful way of speaking about time and change too. That can quiet the grasping heart. Firewood, he wrote, becomes ash, and it can never go back to being firewood again. We might look at that and feel only loss, but Dogen saw it differently. The firewood is fully firewood in its moment, and the ash is fully ash in its moment, each complete in itself. He taught that we do not need to mourn the firewood when we hold the ash, for each moment is whole and entire, lacking nothing, exactly as it is. This is a tender medicine for a mind that lies awake grieving what is gone or fearing what is to come. Each moment, Dogen would say, is not a poor fragment of some better whole, not merely a step on the way to somewhere else. This moment, just now, this breath, this quiet, is itself complete, a whole world, lacking nothing. There is nowhere else you need to be, and no other moment you need to reach. There is only this one, and it is enough, and it is already full. So, let us come now to the practice itself, to zazen, this seated meditation that lies at the center of everything. Imagine the meditation hall, called the zendo, in the grey light before dawn. The air is cool and smells faintly of old wood and of incense. Rows of round black cushions rest upon low mats. The monks enter silently, bow, and take their places, each settling onto a cushion, folding the legs, straightening the spine, and growing still. A small bell sounds, and the long sitting begins. The posture of zazen is itself a kind of teaching. The meditator sits cross-legged upon a firm, round cushion, often called a zafu, which lifts the hips and lets the knees settle toward the ground, so that the body rests upon a stable triangle, steady as a small mountain. The spine rises straight but not stiff, the head balanced lightly atop it, the chin drawn gently in. The body is alert and at ease at the same time, neither slumping nor straining. The hands, in this seated stillness, are placed in a particular and gentle shape, resting in the lap, one hand cradled in the other, palms upward, the thumbs lightly touching to form a soft oval. This shape is sometimes called the cosmic mudra. The lightly touching thumbs become a quiet gauge of the mind's state. If the meditator grows drowsy, the thumbs sag and part. If the mind grows tense, the thumbs press together. The hands themselves keep watch. The eyes, in the Japanese way of sitting, are usually not closed but left half open. The gaze lowered and soft, resting upon the floor a little way ahead, or upon the wall. This may seem strange, for we often close our eyes to turn inward. But the half-open gaze keeps the meditator here, in the room, in the present, neither lost in the dark of an inner dream, nor caught up in the busy sights of the world. The eyes rest, open and unfocused, upon the plain and ordinary floor. And then there is the breath, which is the great anchor of the whole practice in zazen. One breathes slowly and naturally through the nose, letting the breath sink low into the belly, into the soft place below the navel that the Japanese call the hara, the body's quiet center of gravity. The breath is not forced. It is simply followed, watched, allowed. The slow rise and fall of the belly becomes the steady ground upon which the wandering mind can finally come to rest. For beginners, there is often a simple aid, a practice of counting the breaths. One counts each slow out-breath from 1 up to 10, and then begins again at 1. It sounds almost too simple to matter, and yet anyone who tries it soon discovers how restless the mind truly is. For again and again the count is lost, the thoughts wander off, and one looks up to find oneself at 7 or 8 without ever having noticed reaching 4. And so, gently, 1 returns to 1 and begins again. This returning is the secret of the whole thing. Zen does not promise a mind that never wanders. The mind will wander. Thoughts will rise like bubbles. Memories will drift in. Plans and worries will tug at the sleeve. The practice is not to stop them, which cannot be done by force, but simply to notice, without scolding, that the mind has drifted, and to let the thought go, and to come back once more to the breath, again and again and again. The coming back is the practice. In the monastery, a single period of this sitting often lasts about as long as it takes a stick of incense to burn down, perhaps half an hour or so. The thin grey smoke rising and the faint, sweet scent marking the slow passage of time. The monks sit through one such period, then rise for slow walking, then sit again and again through many periods, sometimes for whole days at a stretch, in the long, intensive retreats. And a strange thing happens across those long hours. Time itself seems to soften and slow. The restless urge to be elsewhere, to be doing something, gradually loosens and falls away. At first, the body protests, the legs ache, the mind rebels and races, longing for the bell that ends the sitting. But if one stays with it, breath after breath, something settles. The aches are simply felt, without struggle. The thoughts still come, but they no longer carry one away so easily. And in the gaps between them, wider now, there opens a quiet that is deeply restful, a sense of simply being here, alive, breathing, with nothing to do and nowhere to go. The bell, when at last it sounds, seems to ring out of the silence itself. There is a famous image that Zen teachers use for this, the mind, they say, is like the surface of a pond. When we stir it with our thoughts and our worries, the surface churns and we cannot see through it. But if we simply stop stirring and let the water be, the mud slowly settles of its own accord, and the surface grows clear and still, until at last it can reflect the moon. We do not make the pond clear. We only stop disturbing it, and it clears itself. And so the whole art of quieting the mind in the Zen tradition is not really an act of force at all. It is the opposite. It is a kind of letting go, a setting down. We spend our days gripping and grasping, holding tightly to our thoughts, chasing the next thing and the next. To sit in zazen is to loosen that grip, to stop chasing, even for a little while, and to let the restless waters settle into stillness. There is nothing to achieve. There is only this breath, and then the next. As the centuries passed, Zen in Japan grew into two great streams, two schools with two different flavors, though both are rooted in the same stillness. The first is the school of Dogen, called Soto, with its practice of just sitting, of shikantaza, of simply being present with no goal at all. The Soto way is gentle and patient, like the slow settling of the pond, trusting that awakening is not somewhere else to be reached, but is already here in the act of sitting itself. The other great stream is the Rinzai school, the one that Eisai had brought, and it took a sharper, more startling path toward the same stillness. Rinzai is famous for the koan, a kind of riddle or question that cannot be answered by ordinary thinking. The student is given a koan by the teacher and asked to sit with it, to wrestle with it, to carry it day and night, until the thinking mind, exhausted and baffled, finally falls silent, and something deeper breaks through. The koans are strange and beautiful little puzzles. What was your original face? One asks. The face you had before your parents were born. Another tells of a monk who asked an old master whether a dog has the Buddha nature, and the master simply answered, "Mu," a word that means no or nothing or not. For centuries, Zen students have sat with that single syllable, mu, turning it over, unable to solve it, until the very effort to grasp it wears the grasping mind away. The most famous koan of all was given to the world by a later master named Hakuin, who lived some 300 years ago, and almost single-handedly breathed new life into the Rinzai school. Hakuin asked his students a question that has echoed ever since. We all know the sound of two hands clapping together. He said, but what then is the sound of one hand? There is no clever answer. The riddle is a door, and the only way through it is to let the everyday mind grow quiet enough to pass these two schools, the gentle just sitting of Soto and the fierce riddling of Rinzai, may seem like opposites, but they lead to the same place, a mind grown still and clear and awake. One sits quietly until the pond settles. The other holds an impossible question until the chattering mind gives up its chattering. Both, in the end, are ways of setting down the heavy load of thought that we carry, often without ever noticing how heavy it has become. It is worth pausing to consider how Zen took such deep root in Japan and why it spread as it did. When Eisai and Dogen brought the practice home, Japan was passing into the age of the samurai, the warrior class who had risen to rule the land from their seat in the eastern city of Kamakura. The older forms of Buddhism in Japan had grown elaborate and courtly, heavy with ritual and scripture. Zen, by contrast, was plain, direct, and demanding, and it spoke powerfully to the warriors. There is a deep reason the samurai were drawn to this quiet practice of sitting. A warrior lived always in the nearness of death, and might at any moment be called to face it without flinching. What such a person needed, above all, was a mind that did not panic, that did not freeze in fear or race ahead in worry, but remained calm, clear, and present, even in the gravest moment. And this steady, undisturbed mind was exactly what the long discipline of zazen was meant to cultivate. And so, a remarkable friendship grew between the way of the warrior and the way of stillness. The samurai supported the Zen temples, and the Zen masters trained the minds of the samurai. Out of this meeting came a whole culture, austere and refined, that would shape Japan for centuries, valuing simplicity over show, calm over excitement, and the disciplined mastery of the self above all. The fierce warrior and the silent monk, strange as it seems, became teachers to one another under the patronage of the warrior rulers. Great Zen temples rose in Kyoto and in Kamakura, and the most important of them were gathered into a ranked system known as the 5 mountains, the Gozan. These temples became not only places of meditation, but centers of learning, of art, of poetry, of painting and ink and tea, from which the spirit of Zen flowed out into the wider culture of Japan. For a long age, much of what was finest in Japanese art and thought was nurtured behind the quiet walls of these mountain temples. One of the clearest voices of this meeting between the warrior and the monk was a Zen master named Takuan, who lived some 400 years ago and counted great swordsmen among his students. He wrote to one of them a famous letter on what he called the unfettered mind. The trouble, he taught, comes when the mind stops and fixes upon something, upon a fear, a thought, an opponent's blade. The free mind is one that does not stop anywhere, but flows on like water, present everywhere and caught nowhere. This teaching of the mind that does not stop reaches far beyond the swordsman, into the heart of all the Zen arts and into our own restless nights. So much of our suffering comes precisely from a mind that stops and fixes and clings, that snags upon a worry and circles it for hours, that cannot let the moment pass. To learn the unfettered mind, the mind that lets each thought arrive and depart without grasping it, is to learn a deep and portable peace, one we can carry into any moment of our lives. In the great Zen monasteries, the sitting did not stand alone. It was woven into a whole way of living, in which even the smallest tasks were treated as part of the practice. Between long periods of seated meditation, the monks would rise and walk very slowly in a line around the hall in a practice called kinhin, or walking meditation. Each slow step is matched to the breath, the attention resting on the simple sensation of the foot meeting the floor. The stillness of sitting flows into the slow motion of walking unbroken. And there was work, always work, which the Zen tradition treats not as a distraction from practice, but as practice itself. The monks sweep the wooden floors and the garden paths. They cook the simple meals, tend the vegetables, carry water, chop wood, clean the halls. This mindful labor is called samu, and it carries a teaching as deep as any sutra. There is an old Zen saying that captures it perfectly. Before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. The meaning is gentle and profound. The awakened life is not somewhere far away, in some special state apart from ordinary things. It is found right here in the chopping of the wood and the carrying of the water. If only we are fully present while we do them, to sweep a floor with your whole attention, holding nothing back, wanting to be nowhere else, is itself a kind of meditation and a kind of peace. The most ordinary act, done wholeheartedly, becomes the practice. This is perhaps the deepest gift that Zen offers to a restless modern mind. The understanding that peace is not a place we must travel to, nor a reward we must earn, but a quality of attention we can bring to whatever is already in front of us. The washing of a single bowl, the folding of a cloth, the slow pouring of water from a kettle. Each of these, done with full and gentle attention, can quiet the mind as surely as any hour of formal sitting, in the monasteries to help the sitting monks stay alert. Through the long hours, there was sometimes a figure who walked slowly along the rows carrying a long, flat wooden stick called the keisaku, the encouragement stick. A monk growing drowsy or tense might bow and receive a brisk tap upon the shoulders, not as a punishment, but as a kindness, a sharp and waking touch, to call the wandering attention back to the present, back to the breath, back to the simple fact of sitting here. Now, the monks ate in silence, too, in a careful ritual using a nested set of bowls, taking only what they needed, wasting nothing, treating the plain food with deep respect. The temple cuisine, called Shojin Ryori, was simple and vegetarian, built from vegetables and tofu and rice, and whatever the season offered, prepared with great care. Even eating became a meditation, each bite received with attention and gratitude. The meal itself, another quiet teacher of presence and restraint. Out of this deep tradition of stillness and attention, the Japanese grew a whole flowering of arts, each one a path toward the same quiet mind, each one shaped by the spirit of Zen. The Japanese came to call these refined practices ways, adding to each the small word do, which means a path or a way. There is the way of tea, the way of writing, the way of flowers, the way of the bow. Each is a craft and also a kind of moving meditation, a path to stillness through doing. Consider the way of the bow, the art of archery, the Japanese call kyudo. To the untrained eye, it looks like a sport, a matter of hitting a distant target. But in the Zen influence practice of the bow, the target is almost beside the point. What matters is the state of mind. The archer learns to draw the great bow slowly, to breathe, to grow utterly calm and present, and then to let the arrow loose, not by a deliberate act of will, but by allowing the release to happen of itself in a moment of no mind, when the self has gotten out of the way. This is a strange and beautiful idea, that one might shoot best by not trying to shoot, that the arrow flies truest when the anxious, calculating self falls silent and the body simply acts. The same secret lies beneath the way of the sword, the way of the brush, the way of tea. In each, the long years of training are aimed not at adding some clever technique, but at wearing away the self-conscious mind that gets in the way until the action flows freely and wholly, with nothing held back and nothing left over. Think too of the way of writing, the art of calligraphy, which the Japanese call shodo, with a soft brush, black ink, and white paper. The calligrapher makes a single character or a line of poetry in a few swift strokes. As with the painted circle, there is no going back, no correcting. The brush moves once, carrying the whole state of the mind into the stroke. And so the writer must be utterly present and utterly calm, the hand moving from that same quiet center, the breath low and steady, the mind empty of everything but this one stroke. The Zen painters worked in the same spirit, with the same black ink, in the art of ink painting. A few strokes might suggest a mountain lost in mist, a branch of bamboo bending in the wind, an old master gazing at the moon. Most of the paper was left empty, untouched, white, and that emptiness was not a lack, but the very heart of the picture, the mist, the sky, the silence, the space in which the few inked things could breathe. To paint this way is to know when to stop, to trust the empty space, to say a great deal with very little. And there is the way of flowers, the art of arranging a few stems and branches that the Japanese call ikebana. It is nothing like a great heaped bouquet. Often it is only a single branch and one or two blossoms, set with the most careful attention in a plain vessel, asymmetrical, spare, with much open space around it. The arranger studies the natural line of each stem, the empty spaces between, the balance of the whole, and in placing just a few living things with such care, makes of them a small meditation on growth, on season, on impermanence, and on the beauty of restraint. The most beloved of all these is surely the way of tea. The most beloved of all these is surely the way of tea, the tea ceremony, which the Japanese call chado or shanoyu, the very art whose seeds the monk Aisai had carried home from China so long before. Over the centuries, the simple drinking of tea grew into one of the most refined and contemplative practices in all the world, a slow and deliberate ritual in which a host prepares and serves a bowl of green tea to a few guests with the utmost care and attention. The master who shaped the tea ceremony into its deepest form lived some 450 years ago. A man named Zen no Rikyu, who is still revered as the greatest of all tea masters. Rikyu had trained in Zen at a great Kyoto temple, and he brought the spirit of Zen entirely into the way of tea. He stripped the ceremony of all its luxury and show and made it humble, plain, and quiet, finding in the simplest cup of tea a doorway to the deepest stillness. Rikyu built his tea rooms small and bare, no larger than a few mats, with rough earthen walls and a low ceiling, and a single flower in a plain vase. The entrance was a small, low doorway called the crawling in entrance, so low that every guest, however great or proud, had to bow down and crawl through it to enter. In that small, humbling act, the rank and noise of the outside world was left behind, and all who entered became simply people together in a quiet room. Within that small room, every movement was slow and deliberate and full of attention. The folding of the cloth, the scooping of the green powder, the pouring of the hot water, the whisking of the tea into a soft green foam. There was no hurry and no idle talk. The host gave full attention to each gesture, and the guests gave full attention to receiving the tea. The whole ceremony was, in a sense, a shared meditation, a way of being completely present together over a simple bowl of tea. Rikyu's tea carried within it an idea that lies at the very heart of the Japanese sense of beauty, an idea called wabi-sabi. It is a quiet and difficult thing to put into words. Wabi-sabi is the beauty of the simple, the humble, the imperfect, and the impermanent. It is the loveliness of a rough, handmade bowl rather than a flawless one. It is the gentle beauty of things that are worn, faded, asymmetrical, and plain, things that bear the soft marks of time and use. Where some traditions seek beauty in perfection, in symmetry, in polished gold and flawless form, wabi-sabi finds a deeper beauty in the opposite, in the cracked glaze, the uneven edge, the moss upon the old stone, the single brown leaf among the green. It is a beauty that does not deny that all things age and fade and pass away, but that finds in that very passing something tender and true. To see with the eyes of wabi-sabi is to be reconciled gently to impermanence itself, and so the tea master would choose for his quiet ceremony a humble bowl with an uneven rim, a bamboo scoop worn smooth with use, an old iron kettle, a single wildflower rather than a grand bouquet. In the rough and the plain and the imperfect, he found a beauty that calmed the heart, a beauty that asked nothing and pretended nothing. That simply was what it was. This is the quiet aesthetic that Zen gave to Japan, woven now through its gardens, its pottery, its poetry, and its rooms. The tea ceremony carried within it another beautiful idea, expressed in a phrase that has become famous far beyond Japan. Ichi go ichi e. It means roughly one time, one meeting. The idea is that every gathering, every meeting, every moment is utterly unique and will never come again exactly as it is. This very cup of tea, shared with these very people, in this light, on this afternoon, is a thing that has never happened before and will never happen again. And so it is to be treasured completely while it lasts. There is great peace and a strange kind of freedom hidden in that simple phrase. If this moment will never return, then there is no point in wishing it were otherwise, no point in being elsewhere in our minds. There is only this, now, to be met fully. The whole of the tea ceremony, in a sense, is a training in meeting the present moment, as if it were precious beyond price, which the Zen teachers would gently say, it always is, whether we notice or not. From the tea room, let us step out into the garden, for the Japanese Zen garden is another of the great quiet arts, another way of stilling the mind through beauty. The most famous of all these gardens lies at a temple in Kyoto called Ryoanji, and it is unlike any garden you may be picturing. It holds no flowers, no ponds, no trees within its walls. It is a simple rectangle of raked white gravel, and set upon the gravel 15 stones. The garden of Ryoanji is a dry landscape garden, what the Japanese call Parasansui, a garden of stone and sand meant to suggest, in the barest possible way, mountains and water, islands and sea. The pale gravel is raked each day into long, careful lines and gentle ripples that flow around the stones, like water around islands. There is nothing else, and yet people sit before it for hours, in silence, their minds growing slowly quiet, gazing at the stones and the raked and empty sand. Not all Zen gardens are dry gardens of stone and gravel. There are others, soft and green and full of water, meant to be walked through slowly rather than gazed at from a porch. The most famous of these lies at another Kyoto temple, sometimes called simply the Moss Temple, where more than 100 kinds of moss spread in deep, soft, glowing green over the ground. The roots of the trees, the old stones, the banks of a quiet pond. To walk there is to move through a hushed green world, soft underfoot, the light filtered and gentle, the silence almost touchable. At that temple, in keeping with the spirit of the place, visitors are asked to pause before they enter the garden, and to sit and copy out a sutra with brush and ink, or to sit quietly for a time, so that they come to the moss and the water already slowed, already quieted, ready to receive the peace of the garden rather than rushing through it. The garden and the practice are not two things. One prepares the mind and the other meets it, and together they teach the same gentle stillness. The 15 stones of Ryoanji hold a quiet secret, one that has fascinated visitors for centuries. They are arranged in such a way that from any place you might sit on the wooden veranda to view the garden. You can never see all 15 at once. Always, at least one stone is hidden behind another. No matter where you move, one stone slips out of sight, only from above, a view no ordinary visitor can take. Can all 15 be seen together? Many meanings have been read into this gentle puzzle of the hidden stone. Some say it is a lesson in the limits of our own seeing, a reminder that we can never grasp the whole of anything from where we stand, that some part of the truth is always just out of view. Others say that 15 was, in old reckoning, a number of completeness and perfection, and that to always fall one short is a quiet, teaching about imperfection, about the wabi-sabi truth that nothing in this world is ever quite complete. Whatever its meaning, the garden does its quiet work to sit before that raked gravel and those still stones is to feel the mind grow calm almost despite itself. There is so little there, so little for the thoughts to catch upon, that the restless mind, finding nothing to chew on, slowly gives up and grows quiet. The emptiness of the garden becomes a kind of mirror, for the emptiness one might find within, the spacious stillness beneath all the noise of thought. This love of emptiness, of open and uncluttered space, runs all through the Japanese arts, and it has its own name, Ma. Ma is the meaningful empty space, the pause, the gap, the silence between things. It is the bare wall around a single hanging scroll, the long quiet between two notes of music, the empty gravel around the stones, the pause in a conversation. The Japanese came to feel that the emptiness was not nothing, but was itself full of meaning, that the space between things was as important as the things themselves. We who fill every silence with sound and every wall with decoration may find this strange, but there is deep rest in it, just as a room with a little furniture feels more peaceful than a room crammed full. So, a mind that learns to value the empty spaces, the pauses, the silences, finds a peace that a crowded mind never can. To leave space, to allow silence, to not fill every gap is itself a way of quieting the mind. The emptiness is where the stillness lives. Out of this same spirit grew the art of the briefest poetry in the world, the haiku, those tiny poems of just a few words that try to catch a single fleeting moment whole. A haiku does not explain or argue. It simply points quietly at one small thing, a frog, a crow, a fall of snow, the first cold rain, and lets that single image carry the whole weight of a feeling. In its smallness and its silence, the haiku is itself a kind of Zen, a pointing at the present moment with as few words as possible. The greatest of all the haiku poets was a wandering monk poet named Basho, who lived some 350 years ago and walked the roads of Japan with little more than a robe and a bowl and his attention. His most famous poem is so simple it can seem like almost nothing, and yet it has been loved and pondered for centuries. An old pond, a frog jumps in, the sound of the water, that is all. 3 small lines, and a whole world of stillness within them. Consider that little poem for a moment. Here in the quiet of the night, there is the old pond, silent, still, ancient. There is the sudden small motion, the frog, the leap, and there is the sound, the plop of the water, a single sound that, far from breaking the silence, somehow deepens it. The way a single sound at night makes you aware of all the quiet around it, and then the ripples spread and fade, and the pond is still again, as if nothing had happened at all. The whole of impermanence is in those 3 lines. This is the genius of the haiku and the genius of Zen, to find the infinite in the ordinary, the eternal in a passing instant. A frog, a pond, a sound, things you might pass 100 times without noticing, and yet, looked at with a quiet and present mind, they become a doorway, a small, still place where the whole truth of things shows itself for a moment. The Zen poets learn to look at the world this way, with fresh and attentive eyes, as though seeing each thing for the very first time. Basho left another small poem that carries this same quiet spirit, written on a long journey on foot through the north of Japan, when he climbed to a temple set among the rocks in the heat of summer. So still was that high and lonely place. He wrote that the only sound was the cry of the cicadas, and that single shrill sound seemed not to break the silence, but to sink down into the very stones. Stillness, the poem says, sinking into the rocks, the cry of the cicada. Once again, a single sound, far from disturbing the quiet, makes the quiet deeper, and we feel the great silence of the mountain temple settle into our own bones. There is a lesson in that for anyone who longs for quiet but feels surrounded by noise. We tend to think that stillness means the absence of all sound, and that we cannot be at peace until everything around us falls silent. But Basho and the Zen tradition behind him point to a deeper stillness, one that is not broken by a sound, but somehow revealed by it. The way the cicadas cry reveals the silence of the rocks. The deep quiet is not out there in the world. It is within, beneath the noise, and it can be found even in the midst of sound. There is another small and beautiful expression of Zen that you may have seen without knowing its name, the enso, the Zen circle. It is a single circle, brushed in black ink upon white paper, in one swift, unbroken movement of the hand. The Zen masters painted these circles as a kind of meditation and as an expression of the awakened mind. The circle may be smooth or rough, perfectly round or slightly broken, but it is always made in a single breath, a single gesture, with no chance to correct it. The enso teaches much in its simplicity. The circle is drawn in one breath, and so it is a perfect record of the state of the mind in that one moment, complete and honest, with nothing hidden and nothing fixed. Often the circle is left a little open, not quite closed, and this is on purpose. An expression, once again, of that gentle Zen love, of the imperfect and the incomplete. The open circle holds the whole of things, and yet leaves room for movement, for breath, for life to flow through the gap. All of these arts, the tea and the garden, the poem and the circle, the slow walking and the mindful sweeping, are in the end so many doorways into the same quiet room. They are ways of doing one thing wholeheartedly, with full attention, until the doer and the doing become one, and the restless, commenting, worrying, mind falls silent for a while. This silent, present, undivided mind has a name in Zen. It is sometimes called Mushin, which means no mind, the mind that is so fully here that it has stopped getting in its own way. No mind does not mean a blank or empty head. It means a mind free of its usual clutter, of second-guessing and self-consciousness. A mind that simply acts, simply sees, simply is, without that endless inner voice narrating and judging every moment. We taste it sometimes without trying, when we are so absorbed in something we love that we forget ourselves entirely, and an hour passes like a breath. That self-forgetting absorption is close to what the Zen masters spent their lives learning: to enter at will. There is a related idea, dear to the Zen heart, called Shoshin, The beginner's mind. A famous teacher once said that in the beginner's mind there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind there are few. The beginner, who knows nothing, looks at everything with fresh, open, curious eyes, ready to be surprised. The expert, who knows everything, has stopped truly looking, sure already of what is there. Zen asks us to keep or to recover that beginner's mind, to meet each moment open and unknowing, as if for the first time. There is great rest in the beginner's mind. So much of our weariness comes from the feeling that we already know, that we have seen it all before, that nothing is fresh. But the child watching the rain for the first time, the traveler seeing the mountain newly, the beginner picking up the brush, all of them are fully awake to the moment. In a way, the jaded mind is not. To recover that openness, even for a breath, is to feel the world grow vivid and quiet and new again. There is an old exchange between two Chinese masters that the Zen tradition has never forgotten. A student asked his teacher, "What is the way?" And the teacher answered simply, "The ordinary mind is the way, not some special, exalted state, not some far-off mystical height. The ordinary mind, here and now, drinking tea, washing the bowl, watching the rain, this very mind, fully present, is itself the path and the destination both. There is nowhere else to arrive." And there is great relief in that teaching, for it means the peace we seek is not hidden, away in some distant place or some future day, but is already here, waiting quietly within the most ordinary moments of an ordinary life. The Zen tradition has a gentle and famous way of picturing this whole long journey of quieting the mind, a series of 10 simple paintings known as the 10 ox herding pictures. In them, the restless mind is shown as a wild ox, and the seeker as a herder who must find and tame it. They are an old map of the inner path, drawn not in words, but in images, and they have guided students for many centuries. In the first picture, the herder is searching, lost in the tall grass, looking everywhere for the ox he cannot find, just as we, at first, only feel the restlessness of our own minds, without knowing what to do. Then he glimpses footprints, Then he catches sight of the ox itself. Then begins the long, patient work of taking hold of it and gentling it. The wild ox, slowly growing calm under the herder's steady, kindly hand. Just as the mind grows slowly tame under the steady practice of sitting. In the later pictures, the herder rides the ox home in peace, playing a flute, and then, picture by picture, things fall away. The ox is forgotten. The herder, too, is forgotten. And there comes a picture that is simply an empty circle, a blank, open space, nothing at all. The same enso, the great emptiness in which the grasping self has dissolved entirely. It is in its silence. Perhaps the most eloquent picture of all, the place where even the seeker and the sought have melted into stillness. But the pictures do not end in that empty circle. And this is the most beautiful part of all. After the emptiness comes a return. In the last picture, the seeker walks back into the ordinary world, into the village, into the marketplace, among ordinary people, with open hands and a peaceful heart. The journey does not end on some lonely mountaintop, removed from life. It ends back among the common things, the cooking and the sweeping and the meeting of friends, now seen with quiet and grateful eyes. Now and then, in this long practice of sitting and attending, something opens. The Zen tradition speaks of moments of sudden insight, of awakening, which it calls by names like Satori and Kensho, a sudden seeing into the true nature of things. It is not described as a thunderbolt of strange visions, but more often as a kind of falling away, a moment when the usual separation between the self and the world thins, and one sees with great clarity and great peace that all things are deeply connected and that there was never anything to fear. But the Zen teachers are careful, always, not to let their students chase after such experiences, for the chasing only thickens the very grasping that stands in the way. Awakening, they say, is not something added from outside, but something uncovered, the clear water revealed once the mud has settled. And so they turn the student gently back, again and again, away from the hope of some grand experience, and toward the only place it could ever be found, which is here in this breath, in this ordinary moment, just as it is. There is a beautiful old image the Zen teachers use to guard against a particular kind of confusion. The teachings, they say, are like a finger pointing at the moon. The finger is useful, for it shows us where to look, but we must not mistake the finger for the moon itself. All the words, all the koans, all the practices and arts are only a finger pointing the moon. The real thing, the quiet truth they point toward, is not in the words at all, but in the direct, wordless experience of stillness itself. And this is why Zen has always been a little suspicious of too many words, even its own. It is sometimes described as a teaching beyond words and letters, pointing directly at the heart. For all its rich literature and its libraries of commentary, it keeps insisting that the thing itself cannot be captured in any sentence, but only lived, only tasted, only sat. The truth of a cup of tea is not in any description of tea. It is in the drinking. And the truth of stillness is not in any teaching about stillness. It is in growing still. Because of this, Zen has always passed from teacher to student in a way that leans less on books than on direct, living contact. There is an old 4-line saying that describes it: a special transmission outside the scriptures. It goes, not depending on words and letters, pointing directly to the human heart, seeing into one's own nature. The deepest teaching, in other words, is not written down at all, but passed quietly, mind to mind, from one person who has grown still to another, who is learning too. In the Rinzai monasteries especially, this living contact takes the form of a private meeting between student and master, called Dokusan, alone together in a quiet room. The student brings the koan, or simply brings the state of their practice, and the master responds, often in very few words, sometimes with a single gesture, sometimes with silence. It is an intimate and wordless kind of teaching, less about giving information than about a meeting of two minds, in which the teacher, who has walked the path, gently turns the student back toward their own direct experience. And in the end, every teacher points the student the same way, back to the cushion, back to the breath, back to the simple, ordinary, endlessly deep act of sitting still. The master cannot give the student stillness. No one can give it to another. The teacher can only point, like a finger toward the moon, and the student must do the quiet work themselves, breath by breath, returning again and again to the present, until one day the pond settles on its own and the still water shines. Through all of these arts and ideas runs a single deep current, the gentle Buddhist understanding of impermanence, the truth that all things are always changing, always passing, never fixed. The Japanese felt this truth with particular tenderness and gave it a name, mono, no aware, a soft and bittersweet awareness of the passing of things, a gentle sorrow and gentle sweetness at the fleetingness of all that is beautiful. It is not despair, it is something quieter and kinder, a loving attention to things precisely, because they do not last. Nowhere is this felt more keenly than in the love of the cherry blossom, the sakura, which blooms each spring across Japan in clouds of pale pink, and then, within a week or two, falls. The Japanese have always loved the cherry blossom, not in spite of its brief life, but because of it. The blossom is beautiful, and then it is gone, drifting down in the wind like snow, and that very passing is part of its beauty. People gather beneath the falling petals to feel, together, the sweet, sad truth that nothing lovely stays. The Zen temples have always lived close to the turning of the seasons, and the year itself becomes a teacher of impermanence. In spring, there are the cherry blossoms, brief and pink. In summer, the gardens grow deep green, and the cicadas cry in the heat. In autumn, the maples turn to flame, and people come to the temples to sit and watch the red leaves against the grey stone and the raked sand. And in winter, the snow falls silently over the rock garden, softening the stones, hushing the world, until the whole temple lies still and white beneath a low grey sky. Each season is loved and each is let go. The blossoms fall, the green fades, the red leaves drop and are swept into piles. The snow melts away. Nothing is held. Nothing is mourned for long. The temple simply turns with the year, finding in each passing season its own particular beauty, and then releasing it without complaint when its time has come to live in this way, turning gently with what comes and goes, is itself the deep teaching of the seasons, written each year across the temple grounds. And this, in the end, is not a sad teaching, but a freeing one. For when we stop demanding that things last forever, when we stop clinging to what must inevitably change and pass, a great weight lifts from the heart. We are free. Then, simply to enjoy the blossom while it blooms, the tea while it is warm, the moment while it is here, without the constant ache of trying to hold on. To accept impermanence is to be released from a struggle we were always going to lose, and to find peace on the far side of letting go. It is fitting, before we drift towards sleep, to return to where we began, to the fierce old figure of Bodhidharma facing his wall. For he too lives on in the gentlest corner of everyday Japanese life. In homes across Japan there sits, even now, a small, round, red doll, weighted at the bottom so that however you push it over, it always rocks slowly upright again. This is the Dharma doll, modelled on Bodhidharma himself, and it carries a quiet proverb: fall down 7 times, rise up 8. The Dharma doll is painted with a round, determined face and 2 blank white circles where the eyes should be. When a person sets out towards some hope or task, they fill in one eye and they leave the other blank until the hope is fulfilled. When they fill it in at last, and so the stern monk who sat for 9 years before a wall has become, in the homes of ordinary people, a gentle little emblem of patience and quiet perseverance, of the simple resolve to keep getting up, again and again, however many times one falls. There is something deeply Zen in that small red doll, in the way it always returns to stillness and uprightness no matter how it is knocked about. It is, in its way, a perfect image of the quiet mind the whole tradition points toward, a mind that may be disturbed, rocked, knocked off balance by the troubles of a day, and yet that always, gently, of its own nature, settles back to its calm and upright center, like the doll, like the pond, like the breath returning to rest. So the whole of this long tradition, the sitting and the walking, the tea and the garden, the poem and the circle, comes back at last to something very simple, something you can taste tonight without any training at all. It is the laying down of the burden of grasping, the setting down for a little while of all the wanting and the worrying and the endless commentary of the mind. It is the discovery that beneath all that noise, there is already a deep stillness, like the calm water beneath the waves, waiting, patient, always there. How often, lying awake in the dark, does the mind do the very opposite of all this, clinging hard to what is gone and grasping after what has not yet come? It runs back over the day, turning some small worry over and over. It runs ahead into tomorrow, rehearsing troubles that may never arrive. It is everywhere except here, in this bed, in this dark, in this breath, which is the only place rest can actually be found. The whole long wisdom of Zen is, in a way, a gentle hand laid upon that racing mind, turning it softly back to now. And the way back is always the same, always close at hand, always free. It is the breath. You need no cushion, no temple, no teacher, no years of training. You need only to feel the slow rise and fall of your own breathing here in the dark. And when the mind wanders off into yesterday or tomorrow, to notice gently without any scolding, and to come back once more to this breath, and then the next. This is the whole of it. This is what the monk in the mountain hall is doing. This is what you can do now. You do not have to travel to a mountain temple to find it. You do not have to solve a single koan or arrange a single flower. You have only to do what the monk in the dark hall is doing, what Bodhidharma did before his wall, what Dogen taught in the cold of Eihaiji. You have only to be still and to breathe and to let the busy mind settle like mud sinking slowly through clear water until the surface grows calm and reflects at last the quiet light of the moon. So let the thoughts come and let the thoughts go. There is no need to hold them. There is no need to chase them, like the frog's small sound in the old still pond. They rise and ripple and fade, and the stillness remains deeper than any of them. Let each slow breath carry you a little further down into that quiet that was always beneath the noise, the calm water that has been waiting all along for you simply to stop stirring it. The temple bell sounds once, far off in the mountains, and its long, low note spreads out into the night and slowly fades until even the silence after it seems to be listening. The incense burns low. The gravel lies raked and still in the dark garden. The single flower rests in its plain vase. There is nothing now that you need to do, nothing to solve, nothing to hold. Only the breath, rising and falling, slow and soft as the falling of the snow. The pond grows still. The mind grows quiet. The petals drift down through the dark. A single sound somewhere far away. Then silence. Then the slow, deep stillness beneath all things. Just sitting, just breathing, just this, still, quiet, here.